Hello and good evening. Today on Pint Sized Interviews, the literary version, I'll be talking to multiple Emmy Award-winning writer KIRK Ellis about his latest book, They Kill People, Bonnie and Clyde, A Hollywood Revolution, and its much wider social commentary from gun violence and celebrity culture in America. Welcome, KIRK. So, KIRK, first question. What made you want to write a book about the movie Bonnie and Clyde?
I didn't originally want to write about Bonnie and Clyde. I wanted to do a book about the American obsession with outlaws and firearms and to address the gun violence that's plagued this country really from its inception. But I didn't want to write a book that was political or polemical because you would automatically alienate half your audience by doing that. But I'd always loved Bonnie and Clyde, and I had a chance to see it when I was still living in Los Angeles at the 40th anniversary screening, which would have been 2007, at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood, and it was a very mixed audience. People who remember the film from its original release, younger audiences, people who only knew Bonnie and Clyde as a kind of trademark, and it was extraordinary. And I have since showed it in film groups, talked about it a lot. And it became the perfect vehicle to talk about this American obsession with the criminal class, as Oscar Wilde observed very early on in his tour of America, in a way that would give it a more populist kind of stance. But in doing that, and going into the original Warner Brothers files at the University of Southern California Library, which included things like Warren Beatty's copy of the script, Jack Warner's copy of the script, I discovered all of this unmined material that lent itself to a book that would use the movie as a springboard to larger issues.
Right, I see it. Very interesting, because that was really one of my questions. Do you think that the screenwriters and the writers of the movie had the same idea you were having as well, that they wanted to put the question in a movie as well about gun violence in America?
So Robert Benton and David Newman, the screenwriters, who were wise-ass editors at Esquire magazine, they're the guys who came up with the what's hot and what's not column for Esquire.
Right.
They were really interested in doing a movie about people who were famous for being famous, and were very much influenced by the new wave films that were being made by people like Truffaut and Godard, Chabrol, in that whole period that Richard Linklater is now sort of enshrined in his own movie. But Arthur Penn, the director, was very, very keen on exposing the inherent violence in American society. He had done this on a limited degree in earlier films like The Left-Handed Gun about Billy the Kid and The Chase, which was about essentially a southern town that turns into a lynch mob. But Bonnie and Clyde was the first chance he got to really talk about how, the violence in the 30s, that's the same as the violence of World War II and the same as the violence we're seeing now in American cities during the making of the film. And the movie was engendered in production and throughout its release by this cataclysm of violence in America brought on by the Vietnam War and the potential re-election of LBJ. So it was Penn who really brought that theme home.
Well, then, do you think that audiences at the time realized that was the question being posed in the movie?
Oh, I think the audience reaction to this film, the audience reaction to Bonnie and Clyde certainly surprised the studio, which had written it off as a drive-in picture for Southern audiences who would love the guns.
Right.
But it ignited a whole movement.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions for you. So also, tell us about Bonnie and Clyde being the precursor to the celebrity culture we have today as well.
Sure. So Bonnie Parker was the mythologizer of Bonnie and Clyde even in real time. Remember, they only meet in 1930. They're killed in an ambush in the late spring of 1934. Their criminal career lasts barely 2 years. It takes place at the same time as a lot of other Depression-era crime with names like John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, etc. But they enjoyed fame. They courted fame, they courted that celebrity, and that's certainly what the screenwriters, Robert Benn and David Newman, what really appealed to them about writing the story, because they were living in the Warhol era where everybody was going to get their 15 minutes.
Right, of course.
And, and so Bonnie and Clyde were the perfect sort of youth rebels for that culture. But in examining both the story of the movie and the real story of the Barrow Gang and the culture that they represented, this sort of extension of the outlaw culture of the Wild West, I mean, Bonnie and Clyde were really an extension of those so-called Robin Hood bandits, except they rode in stolen Ford V8s, not on fancy horses. So there was that sense of being part of that outlaw culture where people, Billy the Kid, nobody would have heard of this guy. He was a buck-toothed psychopath and a cop killer, the same as Bonnie and Clyde were. But in the 1930s, a guy named Walter Noble Burns, writes this largely fictitious biography. Guess what? He's Clyde Barrow's favorite outlaw, and a copy of this book is found in the death car after it gets rattled by bullets. So they knew they were following this celebrity culture and wanted to be part of it. And guess what? They became that. And that was thanks largely to Bonnie, whose poetry was discovered among their belongings and became, even before they were killed, part of their legend.
Right. Is that part in the movie too, with the poetry?
Oh, good heavens, yes, yeah. No, I mean, Bonnie is writing a poem that later you see getting read by the U.S. Ranger, the Texas Ranger, who's tracking them. It gets published in the papers. They take photographs that become legendary. That are actually recreated quite well in the Arthur Penn film.
Yeah.
So that's very much a part. The idea of making a legend is what that movie is about. Historical Bonnie and Clyde are sort of bit players to their own story.
Yeah, I do wonder how many people at the time when the movie came out would have noticed all these parts coming together. Which brings me to another question: How's this kind of story, where it was written, informed your screenwriting and producing?
Well, that movie is a marvel of economy. It's just under 2 hours long, and it packs so much information in such a well-paced, well-thought-out, well-structured script. It's the kind of movie that doesn't date because it doesn't appear to be of its time. It appears to be of all times. And in the annals of American film, there are maybe 10 or 20 that you can call timeless, and Bonnie and Clyde is one of them.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of stories that I always aspire to, never quite get there, but still working on it.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating too that. So what year was it? What year did the film come out?
The film was made in '66, comes out in '67, '68. It sort of has this half-hearted release in '67. It debuts for a couple of months, then it's pulled from theaters, then it comes back in full force in 1968 and becomes one of the 5 Best Picture nominees, and so really enters the Hollywood Book of Legend.
Yeah, I think that after hearing your explanations of how the screenwriters wrote it and what it was about, I think most people will have a different view of the movie watching it again after hearing all this stuff.
I mean, the thing you hope for when you do a book like this is that one of two things is going to happen. People are going to watch the movie before, and then they'll be informed by what they read in the book, or even better, the book will inspire them not only to see the movie again, but to think about it much more deeply than they might have without knowing the historical context.
Yeah, exactly.
And what it says about our specifically American culture.
Yeah, well, I hope it's very successful because I think it's a fascinating story, And I think the story of the screenwriting is especially fascinating. And of course, what I didn't realize was it was written in the time of people that would have hung around the factory and been a part of that 60s culture. And so they were adding in their little part into it too as well.
The screenwriters wrote a manifesto. They originally wanted Francois Truffaut, one of the great New Wave directors, to direct the film. And so they accompanied their treatment with a note where they talked about Bonnie and Clyde as being the modern equivalents of the old Outlaws, but they also said, this isn't a movie about the past, it's about what's happening now.
Yeah,
it's about
right.
You,
Yeah.
how you feel,
Yeah.
and what you are doing. And that's the movie that was ultimately made with Arthur Penn's collaboration.
Well, Kirk Ellis, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for spending the time with us on our first pint-sized literary version. And success with the book.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I don't have a pint to drink here with you, but I will have a glass of wine afterwards.
Kirk Ellis, thank you very much.